Are you Islamophobic? Is America Islamophobic? That's the question we're kicking off with today on American Vision's Vantage Point.
Vantage Point is brought to you by American Vision. For more about the topic of today's show, check out the Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. You will find it at AmericanVision.com.
On my right is Gary DeMar. On my left is Joel McDermott. Gentlemen, are we Islamophobic?
Well, I am. I fear some elements of Islam. I mean, what I know about what's happened overseas with Daniel Pearl and cutting off the guy's head. We did a segment on burning the Quran, and if you burn the Quran, soldiers may end up dying, and yet Bibles are desecrated here in the United States. Christians don't go out and burn down the Southern Poverty Law Center. So, yeah, to a certain extent, sure I am. Does that mean I fear all Muslims? No, but there's certainly elements within Islam that I do in fact fear. In fact, if we look, let's face it, it was Muslims, a radical form of Islam, that ended up flying those airplanes into the Twin Towers. So I think there is some legitimacy to the idea that we're fearful regarding Islam.
Yeah, and all the PR can't really change the facts. I mean, the entire history of Islam is a history of bloodshed. Not to say that there's not that in Christianity too, there has been, but at least we can point to our text and say, and condemn that as much as anyone else from the Christian
right.
law, and say, no, that's an aberration of Christianity, when in reality you can't do that with Islam. It's their modus operandi.
Let me read you this verse, chapter 5, verse 32 out of the Quran. Whoever kills a person, unless it be for manslaughter or for mischief in the land, it is as though he had killed all men. So the question is, if you can basically justify killing anybody in Islam if they're creating mischief in the land. It's a very vague text.
Well, yeah, and again, we mentioned within Christianity, I mean, you can pull, and this you have to be careful with kind of the Quran, because you can pull passages out of the Bible, and atheists do this all the time. They go back to the Old Testament and they see, well, the Israelites went in there and we wiped out a whole civilization, and so your Christianity is as violent. And there's certainly an answer within about what that all means. And but today, and I remember I was good friends with Paul Hill. I don't know if those of you who don't know who Paul Hill was. Paul Hill killed an abortion doctor in Florida. I went to seminary with Paul Hill. Paul Hill called me on the phone prior to doing this. Now, I didn't know he was going to do this, but he was seeking justification for killing abortion doctors. He was in a Presbyterian church in America, down in the panhandle of Florida. They excommunicated him. So here's the reaction on one side. We're against abortion. We think killing preborn babies is in fact murder, but we believe there is a proper way to go about trying to solve this issue and shutting down the abortion industry. Going out and killing abortion doctors isn't the way to do this. But the thing is, there were those of us in the church who were attempting at almost all costs to try to stop Paul Hill from doing this. And that is not taking place, again, against, by moderate Muslims. Where is the moderate Muslim population protesting in the streets against these atrocities that Muslims are performing overseas?
Yeah, and when those things happen, at least in Make American headlines, there's always a token liberal Muslim in some university somewhere who speaks up and says, Islam denounces these atrocities. Of course, that guy's a humanist to begin with. He's not really a Muslim, except in maybe form only. The liberal media, and the media in general, rarely ever brings up the flip side of the question. Look at the Muslim nations. What would they say if we moved in and built a church somewhere?
Right.
Now, there are some exceptions to that in some of the places, but look at Saudi Arabia, for example, our ally in all the Middle East stuff, allegedly. It is against the law for any non-Muslim to even enter Mecca, or I believe Medina as well. There are other cities in the nation where it's against the law. I mean, you're going down the highway, literally, what their equivalent of an interstate highway into Mecca. And before you get there, there's a huge green sign, just like we have, that says Muslims only, and then there's a bypass for non-Muslims to take to go around the city. And you are simply not allowed in by law, and that is justified by the Quran. Okay. Now, why is it therefore wrong? Or at least the people who point out that we want to exclude certain people in our culture in any way, that we have to have this total tolerance of all peoples and groups, whatever their religion. Why are they also not just as widely denouncing that religion for those types of scenarios? Why is there this double standard?
It would be interesting to go back to America's immigration laws. In order to get into the United States, you were checked for disease and so forth, and you oftentimes had to have a sponsor here in the United States because you didn't come over here. We didn't really have a welfare, the welfare program here when my grandparents came. I wonder what the conditions would have been, say, in the 1910 or 1920, if radical Islam was in ascendancy back then, and somebody came from a country. Would our immigration policy have excluded Muslims from those nations? And I kind of have the impression that it probably would. Say, wait a minute, there has to be a little bit of reciprocity here about what's going on. We need to be able to have. Now, I guess you could say that a lot of these Muslims maybe have come over here because they didn't like the persecution that was going on in their country. You'd have to ask why they were here. But there's had to be some sort of loyalty oath that was taken. In fact, there is a loyalty oath coming here in the United States.
Now, what about the Muslim population in Detroit? Henry Ford.
And Henry.
So how did they get here?
Henry Ford is an interesting character because he was very anti-Semitic. He took the protocols of the Elders of Zion and he republished them in his, I think it was the Dearborn Examiner. Dearborn Independent. They were under the name of, I think it was under, instead of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it was the International Jew.
Right.
And it was he was very anti-Semitic. One of the reasons he had the Islamic population coming in there is because they were antagonistic against Jews. And today there is a very large Islamic population in Dearborn, Michigan, as a result of this animosity between Islam and Judaism.
Right. So it was essentially hatred of another group that led to the congregation, so to speak, of the Muslims in that area, which tells you what kind of thing draws them to a particular area. That's very interesting.
Joe,
that's the best. That book, the International Jew, the Protocols. Everyone should read that book. Okay, now take out of it the mindset of the Jew and the racism and all that stuff. Someone really should rewrite it and just call it the International, or maybe the International Bankers or something, because what is prescribed in that is essentially what the elite has done globally. It is a global religion, everything else. I know that's a little bit off topic, but you brought it up.
Well, I think you make a good point, because a lot of people use the protocols of the Elders of Zion as look what the Jews are doing. But there's a good possibility that the internationalists themselves put this together to make the Jews a scapegoat, which gives them cover to do what, in fact, they have been doing for the last 100 years.
Absolutely,
or so.
And a lot of it was the destruction of what we would consider Christian civilization and the imposition of this top-down tyranny, much of which is really out of sight because it relies in the areas of banking and finance and stuff that's way over most people's heads. And the whole idea of destruction of Christian civilization, imposing these ideas of relativism, destroying morals, and that leads to the kind of society we have today where we're supposed to accept and tolerate everybody's opinion. Of course, that is the back door for Muslims to invade the country. And slowly, orderly, again, Peter Hammond's book on Islam and slavery, slowly and surely institute their agenda to take over society. So
they're using our freedoms against us.
Absolutely. Well, what are misstated as our freedoms, tolerance and diversity.
Okay,
and
this
these
is
things.
perfect. You guys have set this up for me. Okay, Joel, this is a question for you. We have an email from David Sutton regarding, again, the building of the Ground Zero Mosque. And he makes this point. He says someone who commits a felony forfeits their right to the Second Amendment. Okay, they can't carry legally. Yeah, right. Bear arms. The Muslim community, I mean, over time, historically, has been committed several atrocities. We talked about that in some earlier programs. Because of their violence, especially recently in America, have they forfeited their right to the First Amendment of religious expression?
Yeah, I wouldn't pose the argument in that way, because I think if someone's a convicted felon who's served his time and been released from jail, he ought to be able to carry a gun like anyone else, personally.
Right.
Now, I might make exceptions for people who are mentally ill and don't have the mental capacity to handle a weapon. But I mean, that's to me, it's not someone's criminal background. If someone is that violent of a criminal, murder, rape, etc., they should have been executed to begin with. They shouldn't even be in society.
That brings up a whole different topic.
Right.
Biblical
That's
law.
why I
Yeah.
don't like the way that question's phrased.
Okay.
But then again, I go back to what I've said in a previous show: the whole idea of Christianity being the basis for civilization, the idea of there being an oath of loyalty, and those types of things. That's the only way we should allow people of any other religion, in my opinion, into a society, is if they will vow to uphold the Constitution and the laws, which should be explicitly Christian. So it's on those grounds that I'm tense about another religion who's militant and violent historically to move in and set up shop.
And just because one person or even a group of people in a particular group does something, you can't indict the entire group as a result of someone else's actions. It's just like somebody in your family. Oh, hey, your cousin killed so and so, so now we need to take.
Well, you went to seminary with Paul Hill, so that makes you suspect,
really,
right?
yeah. He was a friend. So.
Well, in the situation of the convicted felon, it's an individual. In the situation of Islam, you can't even really.
That's why I would really like to see. I mean, if the Muslim community is very serious about what's happening to their religion, it's time that they stand up en masse and speak out. But I have to say that they're probably just as afraid to do that as as some Americans are. I believe that there are Muslims who are just as much Islamic phobic as many Americans of non-Muslim background are. We know that's the case. We've seen that overseas. So.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. It's been a great program. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Vantage Point, and we'll see you next time.
For more about the topic of today's show, check out the highly rated title, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades, written by best-selling author and columnist Robert Spencer, president of Jihad Watch. This book is an enormous amount of research that bursts the myths and the lie of a religion of peace by revealing the ongoing unshakable quest for global domination and why the West still faces the threat of Islamic takeover. You will find this great companion guide to the Middle East at AmericanVision.com.
I saw that clock counting down, but I wasn't sure if I should go like this.
I saw it 17 seconds. I thought, is he going to jump immediately and hit that button, or what's he going to do?